environmental catastrophes because of global warming in particular. They're likely to get worse for a while. But they say we don't have a lot to worry about because we have two very powerful forces that are sort of spontaneously going to solve the problem for us. And those two forces are the market and technology. These two things work together, some people claim. And they work together in a way that solves all of the problems we face. For example, we've had oil crises since the 1970s, periods of time when there are big oil shortages. Price of oil skyrockets, everybody runs around scared, jobs are lost, inflation takes place, people think it's the end of the world. And what happens, they say? Well, the market comes into play. People recognize that the price of oil, when it goes up from, say, $12 a barrel to $100 a barrel, they realize there's a lot more money to be made in finding oil. And they can develop and use more expensive new techniques for extracting oil in places that were not economical before, when the price of oil was only $12 a barrel. And so what happens when the price of oil skyrockets is that oil companies invest a lot more in finding new forms of oil or finding oil in new places. In other words, they're responding to market forces, and they create new technologies to find more oil, bringing the price of oil down and making it more affordable. Once again, well, many analysts think that environmental problems are going to work in the same way. We're going to have problems, people are going to see the problems, where if there's money to be made, then the market will respond and people will develop technologies to solve the various issues that I've sketched in the past hour or so. And some evidence does support this optimistic scenario. In recent years, we have adopted some new technologies to combat some of the worst excesses of environmental degradation. For example, we used to have lead in our gasoline. And it was recognized at a certain point that when you burn gasoline and there's lead in it, it's really bad for people, especially their brains, and especially the brains of young children, that it causes brain damage. And therefore, lead was removed from gasoline. We don't sell leaded gasoline anymore. It was recognized some decades ago that the stuff we use, the chemical we use for refrigerants, chlorofluorocarbons, stuff that's in your refrigerator that keeps the refrigerator cold, when it's released into the atmosphere, when this gas is released into the atmosphere, it eats through the ozone layer of the atmosphere. And that's problematic because it allows radiation to enter in ways that are obviously dangerous for vegetable and animal life on the planet. And so, in the 80s, we placed a ban on the use of chlorofluorocarbons and introduced new types of refrigerants that would not cause that kind of damage to the ozone layer. And in a model of international cooperation, the rich countries even subsidized the less developed countries in their move from the use of chlorofluorocarbons as refrigerants to the use of other kinds of gases, because the switchover was quite expensive. So we have solar panels now, we have windmills, we have hybrid cars. There's all kinds of things that we have developed, technological solutions that are a response to market forces. Factories are equipped with high-tech pollution control devices. We put catalytic converters on our cars to decrease the amount of pollution that they create, the amount of heat-trapping gases that they emit. We're increasingly preventing dangerous chemicals from seeping into the water. And we have put better mileage limits on our vehicles. Now we have to get more miles to the gallon than we used to. There was a set of laws that came into place in the 1970s. new set of laws are coming into place right now which demand higher miles per gallon for cars. So, and we're recycling, of course, many things, beginning some decades ago. So clearly market forces are working to some degree. We are responding. We are trying to mitigate the effects of environmental degradation. But as far as I'm concerned, and as far as many sociologists and others are concerned, there are certain factors operating which suggest that market and technological forces alone can't solve environmental problems completely. And I've listed these factors on this next slide, why the market and high technology can't entirely solve the problem of environmental degradation. First point that I want to make is that price signals are imperfect. Price is supposed to be the signal that, okay, go out, develop a new technology, find a new way to produce a particular good because there's high demand for it. But the cost, the amount of money we pay for gasoline in this country is a poor signal of the actual cost of burning gasoline. In other words, right now gasoline costs what, about $1.20 a liter? The actual cost to the environment of burning a liter of gas is more like 3 or 4 times that amount. In other words, we are not responding quickly to the effect of gasoline on the environment because the cost of gasoline is so low, it's artificially low, in the sense that the government is not taxing gasoline to the point where it would actually reflect the cost to society of burning a liter of gas. Some countries, mostly in Western Europe, do tax gasoline at much higher levels. It costs maybe, $6 a liter in some countries, rather than $1 a liter. There, in countries like Germany or Denmark, elsewhere, there, the tax money that's collected from gasoline is used to develop alternative energy technologies. Denmark is a world leader in the production of wind turbines. Germany is closing down its entire nuclear industry as it moves more and more to solar and wind energy, right? But we are not doing that because we are not taxing gasoline at very high levels. We're paying relatively little for gasoline. It means that we continue to use lots and lots of gas. And because the gasoline that we buy does not reflect the actual cost to the environment, it means that the signal that we should be switching to an alternative form of energy is weak. That's what I mean when I say that price signals are imperfect. We are not responding as quickly as we need to the burning of fossil fuels because we are not taxing the burning of fossil fuels at high enough levels, at least in North America, in the Middle East, in many parts of the world, in Eastern Europe, and so on. The second point that I want to make is that the kinds of reforms that we need to see that will help us deal with the environmental problems that I outlined this afternoon require a lot of political pressure. They don't happen on their own. Political pressure has to be exerted by environmental activists and community groups, by public opinion. All of that needs to happen before governments and corporations act on environmental issues. For instance, organizations like Greenpeace have successfully challenged the practices of logging companies and whalers and the nuclear industry and other groups that engage in environmentally dangerous practices. And many less famous community associations have also played an important role in this regard. Without the efforts of these kinds of political groups, of these kinds of pressure groups, it's very doubtful that many environmental issues would be defined as social problems requiring action by governments and corporations. So In other words, this notion that the market and technology are going to combine to solve the problem doesn't just ignore the fact that price signals are often weak or imperfect, it also ignores the fact that action tends to be taken only when political pressure is placed on corporations and governments. And the third thing that the market plus technology argument ignores is that the pace of change has been very slow. That is to say, we're not moving quickly enough. Just take a look at this graph of what's happened to some of our chief global resources over a recent 20-year period. The amount of fish that we catch has declined by 10%. The amount of land that we can irrigate and cultivate has decreased by 12%. The amount of cropland by 22%. The amount of pasture and rangeland by about the same amount. Forests have decreased in size by 30%. On a whole range of issues, we are facing decreases in renewable resources. We're not moving quickly enough. So market and technology forces certainly help, but they're not helping enough. Which, I guess, raises the really important question. What is to be done? We've got a near catastrophe now, a likely catastrophe in coming decades. We are moving in the right direction in many parts of the world, but the pace of change is simply too slow to deal with the problems that I've outlined. What do we do? Any suggestions? Let's say you're in control of the world right now. You belong to the world government. You can make policy. I would like to see some hands, suggestions of what can be done. Sir, nice and loud. Well, okay, put some policies in. What are those policies? Okay, let's say we follow this gentleman's suggestion. We want to reduce the amount of fossil fuels that are burned. Okay? So one way of doing that is by putting a tax on fossil fuels. Let's say that our assembly here, the world government, decides that in countries like Canada, which are not taxing fossil fuels at a very high rate, as of tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., the price of gasoline will go up from $1.20 a liter to $4 a liter. What's going to happen? Many of you drive. You're going to like this? No. You're not going to like it. In fact, so many people would be so angry with the government of this country if it tripled or quadrupled the price of gasoline, they would probably vote them out of office at the very first opportunity. As a matter of fact, any policy that you can come up with, I'm going to suggest to you, is really expensive. It's going to affect a lot of people, and a lot of people are not going to want to implement the policy because they'll be hurt by it in the pocketbook. They'll have to pay foreign taxes, and they don't like that. People don't like that. In the short term, it'll be very painful. I've got a whole list of things that I think we should do here. Look, I have the perfect solution to the environmental problem, but of course it's all a pipe dream. A pipe dream in the sense that I don't think we can implement any of this. We have to reduce consumption of all kinds of junk that we don't need, particularly those of us who live in rich countries. We have to develop new energy-saving technologies, clean up the environment, on and on and on. Subsidize poor countries for doing the same. The Chinese and the Indians say correctly, hey, you guys went through industrialization. You guys became rich. Now you're telling us that we can't pollute, that we have to spend all this money in order to keep a clean environment while you guys destroy the planet? You guys should be helping us create environmentally safe industries. You should be subsidizing us. The rich countries say, no, we don't do that. It's going to cost us money. It's true that we had the advantage of doing it, just making a mess of the planet, but now we want you guys to do it in a much more expensive way so that you don't pollute. Understandably, the Chinese and the Indians and so on, and the Indonesians don't like this story very much. They oppose the ideas of Canada and the United States about who gets to pay for all this. But it's pretty clear that since they're not going to do it, and they're polluting a lot, China and India and so on, we ought to be, in order to sort of create justice in the world, subsidize the industries in these countries to clean up the environment, not to pollute. We need to raise taxes, and so on and so forth. But again, this isn't going to work. It's not going to work because so many people will be negatively affected by it in the short term, in my opinion. Do you disagree or agree with me? Anyway. So we're done. So we can expect more catastrophes, and that's it. Is that the conclusion? Anybody want to say anything to it? Let me tell you a story which may change your mind a little bit. I was talking earlier about World War II. It's a World War II story. The United States didn't want to enter World War II. The American people were opposed. World War II broke out in 1939. The United States said, this is not for us, it's a European problem, let them kill each other, goodbye. And then some of its allies got into trouble, like England and China. So the United States said, well, you know, we'll send some supplies over there. We'll send some food and some military wares over to China and to England and help them out a little bit, but we're not going to fight. When did the United States start to get involved in World War II in a serious way? What happened? Anybody know? Pearl Harbor. The Japanese came in, they destroyed the Pacific Fleet, and all of a sudden the United States says, you know what? This is a war we've got to fight. This is a war we've got to fight because we're actually threatened. This is the way people behave, ladies and gentlemen. People act when they don't have a choice. They sacrifice when they have to sacrifice. People can't just be told, oh, look, there's a huge problem here. The world may not be coming to an end, but many, many people will suffer on a very large scale, particularly disadvantaged people, but all of us to some degree, if we don't act, and we got to shell out the money and do something about it. People won't act on that. What has to happen is that people have to die. People have to die first and suffer. When I was saying before that in order for an environmental issue to become a social problem, people have to see that problem reflected in their own lives. I mean, I should have said they have to see the problem reflected in the deaths of loved ones, too, not just in their own lives. So now that we've had this terrible flood in New York last year, and in New Jersey, finally people are saying, you know what, we need to tax the population of this area more and get more in taxes from the government. We need to sacrifice more in order to build up in the waters outside of New York special walls that will divert storm surge so it won't go inland. They can actually build these big barriers that will divert from the highly populated areas any surge of waves coming in. After Hurricane Katrina, another example, finally, the United States, although we knew, because we had a ton of research studies on the subject, we knew that Hurricane Katrina was going to happen. If not in 2005, then in 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10. We knew what the consequences would be. Nothing was done about it. There were banner headlines about it in local newspapers for years before the storm, and nobody did anything. However, once 2,300 people were drowned in that particular episode, and the city of New Orleans destroyed, then finally the United States Corps of Engineers was given the money to start building a really effective system of levees and dams and so on to prevent a recurrence. Unfortunately, human beings are constituted in such a way that we cannot think rationally very well about future consequences of present-day actions. And we only start to act once we start seeing our children die. I hate to say it in such awful terms, but really, that's the way human beings are constituted. Only after Pearl Harbor did the United States get involved in World War II. Only after Hurricane Katrina did the United States Corps of Engineers start to build up the levee system in a responsible way. Those storm surge walls are only getting built now outside in the waters around New York and so on. I don't know what's going to happen in Bangladesh because Bangladesh doesn't have the money to do it, and we're not contributing. I don't know if the death of many tens and hundreds of thousands of Bangladeshis will be enough to get us to shell out some money to help those poor people. But I believe, honestly, this is what needs to happen. So it's kind of a sad story that I have to tell. And I don't know the answer to the question. A woman came up here earlier and said, does this mean the end of the species of humans? I don't think it means the end of the species. I think it means we're going to be facing some big catastrophes in coming decades. The catastrophes are going to get bigger and bigger. And it may be too late. I don't know. It's touch and go right now. When I gave this lecture even 10 years ago, I used to be a lot more optimistic than I am now about whether we could avert the big catastrophes that the climate scientists and others are predicting. Now I'm not so sure. I'm really not so sure. I do know that it's up to you. I do know that it's up to us to act in a responsible way. But I also know that we may have to suffer a lot before we get to the point where we actually really believe that's the point where we're willing and able to act, to sacrifice, and cooperate. We're ending a little early today. I'll see you in 2 weeks.